Hi guys, today I'm going to do another video talking about network segmentation. This one is going to be more of a how-to video, and that's how to install pfSense onto Hyper-V. Now, my previous videos were kind of more just abstract theory about how network segmentation works and why it's a good thing. And then I talked about how VLANs work and how you can do that with some inexpensive networking gear. But today I'm just going to show you how I set up my instance of pfSense on top of Hyper-V with VLANs so that it would integrate with my network and using VLANs with my hardware that I've purchased that do support VLANs as well. So this is going to be more of a how-to video, and I'm definitely going to throw in some commentary in there. I'm going to go through the process of setting up Hyper-V first, which is really not that hard to do. It's probably something that most people could figure out. And then I'm going to show you my setup and how I've got it configured and why I configured it the way I did. And then you'll see how it works once I get it done. And it does work because I've been using it for several years now, but it's mostly just to show you some of the idiosyncrasies of why I chose to do it this way versus some of the other ways that you could probably do it, but this is how I did it and it's been working great. So let's just go through the setup process in a more general sense, and then we'll go look at VLANs on Hyper-V and pfSense. So the first thing you need to do is get the media. It's pretty straightforward. Go to pfSense.org and then go to /download. And this will give you the option to download it. Download it just the AMD 64bit, which is the version that we'll be using with Hyper-V. We want the DVD ISO, and then pick a mirror that's close to you and hit download. And then when you're done with that, you'll get an ISO image. And that ISO image will come into your documents folder, or your downloads folder rather. And it's a GZ file. And so you'll need to open that up using something like 7-zip, which is what I have. So you can use 7-zip, open the archive, and then just simply extract the image using that. So if I go here to more options and then go to 7-zip, open archive, and then I can just move the ISO over into my downloads folder. And once that's done, I'm going to replace it since I've already done this. You'll have the ISO file and it'll be ready to go. So once you have the ISO file, then you're ready to work with the Hyper-V installation. So you'll need Hyper-V enabled on the host machine. So to do that, type in features, and you'll pull up the optional features that are available on Windows. So you'll enable Hyper-V right here, and then you'll want to make sure that Hyper-V management tools are installed, and also that the Windows Hypervisor platform is installed. You don't have to have this one installed because the Hyper-V option will work fine. Then you click OK, your machine will reboot, and then everything will be installed. So after you reboot, then you can then load Hyper-V, which will be just it'll be an option on your menu. And so you can just type in Hyper-V right here, and you'll want to start Hyper-V Manager. And then Hyper-V Manager is the tool that you'll need to set up all of your VMs on this particular platform. So let's go ahead and install this now. So setting up the VM is pretty straightforward. We'll walk through this pretty quickly. Just click under Actions, click New, and do Virtual Machine. And then you can walk through this wizard. I'm going to call it pfSense 1 or something like that. And then you can specify generation 1. You don't need UEFI boot or anything like that. Gen 1's fine. For memory, this is discretionary depending on what you want to use pfSense and the feature set you want to use. A basic setup, 2 gigs is fine. If you have a more advanced setup and there's going to be features and functions that you turn on with pfSense, then you'll want more RAM. But for this particular one, I'm going to use 2 gigs. The networking for this, just take a default switch or another switch that you might have already configured, whatever one you're using. We'll talk about these in a minute. And because we're going to completely reconfigure the network anyway. So just take a default there. For the disk size, you can use 32 megs or 32 gigs of storage for a more basic setup with pfSense. Certainly, if you're going to be using it for more advanced features, more disk space is going to be required. I don't use mine for anything like a SAN or some kind of file sharing system or anything like that. I just use it for a straight up firewall, and I don't have a lot of like advanced packet sniffing and a lot of that kind of feature turned on. So I don't need a lot of RAM for this. I don't need a lot of storage for it. So 32 gigs is fine. Installation options, we're going to be installing this later, so we'll just select the install operating system later. And this is the summary, and then you click finish, and then it will create your VM. Now, the next thing that we need to do is configure the networking. And this is where things can get a little bit more complicated than a typical VM. So I'm going to walk you through how that works on this particular setup. So the first thing that we need to set up for the networking components is virtual switches. So on Hyper-V, you have Virtual Switch Manager right here, and I already have a couple of these currently configured, like WSL and the default, and these two that I use for dev machines. I want to set up two switches in my context, one for the wide area network, that's your internet side, and you want another one for your local area network, that's your internal network. And you need to set these up both as external in the nomenclature of Hyper-V, and that's because they're external to the hypervisor. So these are going to be connected to a physical network somewhere rather than a virtual network in the context of Hyper-V. So I'm going to create a virtual switch right here that's external, and I'm going to call it wide area network. And on the wide area network side, this is for your internet facing one. You can choose the adapter you want to bind it to, but you want to uncheck this box right here, allow management operating system to share this network adapter. And that's because you don't want that particular switch that's connected to the internet to expose the host operating system. And so uncheck that box. There will be no host operating system NIC attached to that switch. So the only thing that's going to be connected to it then will be the virtual machines that are going to be forward facing, that are kind of firewall facing to the internet, and not your internal network, which is what it would be if it was the hypervisor. So uncheck that just to make sure, and then click apply. You can bind it to whatever your adapter is, so that depends on what you're doing. So if you have two network adapters, which you will need for pfSense, choose one that is going to be your internet facing one. So in my case, let's just choose this Realtek Gigabit Ethernet here, and then you click apply, and it might do some stuff like that. So I'm not going to create this one. I'm going to create another one because I'm going to show you my setup in a minute. I'm just showing you how I did it. So I'm going to create another one. In this case, it's still another virtual switch. This one is external, and I'm going to create a virtual switch here. It's still external to the perspective of the hypervisor, which in this case is the Windows OS. And I'm going to call this one LAN. And this one is an external network that I'm going to bind to a different network card than my external network. In this case, let's just choose this Ethernet connection here. And I'm going to allow the management network to connect to this particular switch. That's so that the host hypervisor can then use pfSense kind of as its firewall router for getting out to the internet. So it can then route traffic out of that particular firewall, even though it's a VM on the hypervisor. And so that allows it to use it as its router and firewall. Now, and then once you do that, you can click apply, and that will create your second switch. And once you have your WAN switch created and your LAN switch created, now you're ready to create your NICs on those. But we first need to reconfigure the virtual machine. So let's go in and do that. So let's tweak the settings on the VM now. So let's go over here to settings, and we're going to tweak a couple of the settings on this first. Now, if you need to change the memory, you can always change the memory amount, which in this case I set to 2 gigs, which I know that's probably sufficient. You don't necessarily need 12 virtual processors. That was the default that is assigned to this. Now, depending on how much traffic you're going to be processing and the amount of processing you're going to do on that traffic will determine how many CPUs you'll need. If you're just going to use it kind of like a basic setup, like I have it, like a firewall that does some basic traffic inspection and filtering, all of that, 2 will be fine. If you're going to be doing some more stateful packet inspection or snort or any other kind of protocol sniffing or anything like that, then you might need a lot more RAM and a lot more CPU to throw at it. So I'm going to set it to 2, which should be more than enough for this particular setup. If you have a busy network, of course, you're going to want more processors as well. So go ahead and do that. So with 2 virtual processors, we're good there. Now, this is, we're also going to add in some hardware to this. So to add hardware, you go up to add hardware up here, and we're going to add in a network adapter. Now, we already have the one network adapter right here. That is the default one. And you'll want to change this one to be whatever switch you want it to be. So typically this is going to be the wide area network. So you would set that up to be your external switch. So in my case, I didn't save it, but I would have maybe, let's just use this default switches for instance, but that would be my WAN switch. That's where I'm going to set the default network adapter on this for the WAN side of my setup. Now I'm going to come over here to add hardware and add another network adapter right here. And this one, I'm going to add it to my LAN side. And the LAN side is the one that's going to be internally facing. And this is where I want to put in my VLAN IDs. Now, this is one of the idiosyncrasies I ran into this. And when I was setting all this up, what I ended up doing is I ended up creating one NIC per VLAN that I wanted to get this to work with Hyper-V and my gear. So your mileage may vary, but when I was all said and done, I ended up creating one NIC per VLAN with Hyper-V to get it all working. So let's just use a VLAN ID of maybe 100. And then once I add that one in, it's going to add in a LAN NIC card that with the VLAN ID of 100. So all the traffic will communicate on that particular VLAN. And so I already configured my networking gear with VLAN. So my switch, my managed switch, my access points, and the firewall are all going to be using these same things. So what I would do then in this case is add in a new network card for each VLAN that I want to connect to. So in this case, 200. If I wanted another network adapter with a different VLAN, and then add another one if I had a third one. In my case, I had 4 VLANs, so that's what I adding is 4 different LAN side VLAN adapters with different VLAN IDs on them. So I ended up with something that looked like that. And so when you're done, you should have some kind of configuration with a certain amount of memory, a given number of virtual processors, depending on what your needs are. Then you're going to have a network adapter connected to the WAN side switch, and then you're going to have one or more network cards connected to your LAN side switch. In this case, with mine, I'm using one NIC per VLAN, and then that is saved. So once that's said and done, click OK, and now we're ready to actually install this. But before we do that, we actually need to add the media in. So go down to your controller here, and then your IDE controller 1, which says DVD drive, and then you just browse out and find your downloads folder where you put that ISO file, and then see if I can do a pfSense ISO here, and then open that up and apply, and now we're ready to actually install this. So installing it is pretty painless, so let's go ahead and do that now that we've got the VM configured and we've got the network kind of set up already. So installing this is pretty much as easy as just starting it up once you have everything configured, and it'll start booting here in just a second, and you should see some screen on the text on the screen that looks like this. And this installation process is really fast, depending on the speed of your drive, especially if you're installing it like on from an SSD ISO to a VM. This only takes a few minutes. It's not like installing Windows or a heavy operating system, which is actually pretty small. So you accept the license and you click install, and then you use auto ZFS on root on ZFS, which is fine. You choose where you want to install it, select that, no redundancy, select the disk. It'll format the drive, and once the drive is formatted, it will install it, which doesn't take long at all. And before you reboot, you want to make sure that you eject the disk right here. So eject the ISO from media, and then hit reboot. And then once the media is ejected and you rebooted, then that will boot it up to the text mode configurator. That will give you some basic options, enough to where you can configure this guy to connect to it and then use the web UI to do the more fine tuning of pfSense. And so pfSense itself is pretty straightforward to install using the web UI. But I'm gonna look at that on my installation once I kind of get through this. So this is going to boot into the installed version now, which again just basically copied everything off of the ISO And then it's going to go through all of this stuff. And so this is the first thing that pops up right here. And so it's going to ask you to configure things. You don't have to configure the VLANs here. In fact, I don't typically do that. I mean, I really just configure the basic networking, and then you can do the rest of it kind of in the web configurator. So you don't have to set up the VLANs now. So I'm gonna hit no. But you do want to set the WAN and the LAN side. So the LAN and the WAN side. The WAN interface in this case, or the wide area network, or the internet facing side, should be the one that the adapter you connected to the WAN adapter, and it's the first one in the list on the VM. So it's going to be the first one on the list here, which is HN0, and then you want to set the LAN side, which is going to be the primary adapter for just out of the gate for configuring this. So you can set HN1, which would be the second one in the list for the first adapter in the LAN side. And then you can set up the optional interfaces here. So I'm going to set up HN2 for opt1 and then HN3 for opt3. And these won't do anything currently. It's only going to configure the WAN and the LAN interface, and these optional ones, it's just going to leave them as optional for now. And that's all the configuration you need to do at boot. And then do you want to proceed with this setup? And you hit yes. And it's going to then configure the WAN interface and then the LAN interface. And so depending on what your setup is, it will detect the IP from your ISP if it's on the WAN side, and then the LAN side, it'll just it sets up a DHCP server. And that DHCP server then is needed to assign IP addresses to any machine you plug in and want to configure it with. So it's going to set up a basic DNS server, DHCP server, and just configure all that kind of basic firewall stuff for you after you set up the interfaces. And that's all you need for now. So you can see here, mine grabbed an IP address from this default switch that my WAN adapter was on. That's an internal IP address, and then it's using this IP scheme right here, 192.168.1.1, for the internal one. And this gives me enough networking now to connect to the firewall so that I can configure it from whatever machine I'm connecting from, which could be the host VM, or it could be another machine on your network. But in any case, I have enough now that I can connect to it. So I don't need to do anything else with the text mode interface. And so you just go to this IP address right here in a browser. Once you've plugged a machine into this network that will grab an IP from its DHCP server, you just punch this IP address in, and then you're ready to log in. And the login for this will be admin pfSense, admin for the username, pfSense for the password for the default. But then, of course, you'll want to change that because that's not good to have the defaults. So now that we installed everything, the actual setup for mine looks very similar to what I just showed you. You have the WAN switch manager here, and I have a WAN and a LAN switch. The WAN is set up exactly like I showed you a minute ago. It's bound to a Ethernet adapter, USB actually, and that is the internet facing side, and I disallow the host operating system from connecting that. I don't want my host operating system directly connected to the internet. Rather, it goes through the firewall just like everything else on my network does. And so that will prevent that. And then I have the LAN side, which is connected to another Ethernet adapter. And I do allow this one to connect to this particular network because I want this one to be available to me. If I wanted to, say, remote into it like I am now, I can do that. And so it enables that and makes it possible. So it is behind the firewall. And then if I go over here to my settings, you can see that I have pretty much exactly like I just showed you. I have processor, 2 gigs of RAM, 2 processors, and then I have all my NICs down here. So my network adapter 1 is external facing, and I put that on my WAN switch. There's no VLAN on that. The VLANs are on these 4 right here. I have 100, 200, 300, and 400 configured, and they're all on that LAN side. And so each one of those is configured exactly like I want it to be. One one network adapter for each VLAN that I'm using on this VM. And then I have a DMZ adapter. This is not needed for this. This is just something I put on here for like dev test type stuff. So I can put stuff into this DMZ and it will be kind of cordoned off from everything else. So that's what that's for. So that is my Hyper-V setup. Now, my setup on my firewall is a little bit different than what you might be expecting. So let's go to the IP address for this and log in. So you want to use admin pfSense if you're logging to this for the first time. You can change the password under system right here, and you can update, use user management, change the default password. You actually kind of want to do that because it's not secure otherwise. Now for this, all the magic for configuring pfSense is on this interface tab, and there's a few other tabs over here that we can look at in a minute. But if you go over to this assignment, you're going to see interface assignment. Now in pfSense, if you set this up like I did with the VLAN adapters being tagged to the actual network adapters on Hyper-V, you don't have to set up VLANs on this. In fact, I don't have those bound at all to the VLANs. In fact, I have each one bound to just the actual network adapter, because the hypervisor is then going to tag the traffic for me on each one of those VLANs. And so I have each one of my different adapters connected to one of those VLAN IDs that I configured in Hyper-V. I don't have to reproduce that inside of this particular interface here. So you just assign whichever one corresponds to whatever VLAN you want to use. And then you can rename it whatever you want. So this is VLAN main for my main network. And then I used guest, and then there's my work, and there's my IoT network. So each one of those is a different network for a different purpose. And each one of them is using a different VLAN ID. And I put the VLAN and the ID in there so I can kind of see what they are. So the one that's going to configure by default is going to be this one right here. And the services on this is just going to be a DHCP relay. It's rather server right here. And you can see here that I have DHCP server enabled for that one, for the guest network, and then for my work network, and then for my IoT network. And each one of them has a different subnet, a different IP range on the network. And so because these are each tagged with different IDs on the outgoing and incoming traffic, based on what Hyper-V is doing behind the scenes, then the actual physical hardware that I have, that is my switches, my access points, understand that tagging, and so it will allow or disallow it to access a certain network depending on what network it's using. And so that is pretty much all you have to do to get this to work for VLANs on Hyper-V. Now there might be another way to do this. My first attempt at this, and I've been a few years since I did it, I tried to use a single NIC and then use the VLAN functionality built into pfSense to configure it, and I had mixed results with that. I found that the best way to do this is just simply to use the Hyper-V tagging that's available right here, and just setting the VLAN ID right here, and that corresponds to whatever I configured in my hardware, be it my switch or my access points for each of the networks that I'm supporting. So once you have that and you have all of your DHCP set up, then you can it'll automatically set up all of the routing for you, and then you can put firewall rules in as well. So you can have several firewall rules that look like this. So these are just some default ones right here. Depending on what you're doing. And so I have some, reverse NATing going on to a machine. That's for like some web server type stuff. And then, of course, here's my main network. I've got a couple of rules here for different things, and a lot of outgoing traffic from here. Source destination is from my network, basically outgoing traffic, and I've passed a lot of traffic since I on this thing. So I also have a DNS server on this host machine. So a lot of the traffic coming into this on port 4 for port 53, I allow for DNS. and things like that. And you can set up rules for your particular setup as well. And each one of my networks has a different set of rules depending on what I'm doing with that particular setup that I have. So all of this is to say is each one of these is working, and this setup works solid. I have no issues with it. It's fast. I have nothing to complain about. So if you're wondering how to do it, this is one way. There might be other ways. Your mileage may vary, but this I've been using it for several years now, and it has worked well for how I use my pfSense setup, and with Hyper-V on a network that I have my VLAN set up on. So if you like this content, as always, like and subscribe to the channel. And then also comment down below if you set this up in a different way using Hyper-V, you with VLANs, let me know. I'm kind of always curious how other people do things, and so this is one way, but there's probably another way, maybe a better way. And if you use a different firewall, certainly check that out. I would like to see any other different ways of doing that. So yeah, drop me comments, and as always, thanks for watching.
If you like this content, please consider subscribing to the channel by clicking on the subscribe button. You can also like this content by clicking on the thumbs up, or share this content with your friends, and also comment in the comment section down below. You can also find me online at www.blaze.net or on Twitter at @TheOneMule. And as always, thanks for watching.